So this is a Power Mac G4 3.6, also known as G4 MDD. This beast comes from my favorite part of Apple history, late 90s and early 2000s, when Apple was the underdog and did crazy stuff. And I don't mean just that cool door mechanism, but also insane marketing. I mean, just look at this cringeworthy masterpiece.
For the first time in history, a personal computer has been classified as a weapon by the U.S. government. With the power to perform over 1 billion calculations per second, the Pentagon wants to ensure that the new Power Macintosh G4 does not fall into the wrong hands. As for Pentium PCs, well, they're harmless.
Yeah. That whole thing was about them calling this thing a supercomputer, which, I mean, if you believe the marketing hype, I guess it technically was.
We got the idea for this commercial when we were informed by the United States government that we are not authorized to export the new Power Mac G4 to many sensitive countries around the world because it is classified as supercomputer level performance. You want to see that again?
Nah, I'm good, Steve. This was also a time when they actually had to fight for their share of the marketplace. And one amazing way they tried doing that was being price competitive. I mean, can you imagine people actually clapping when seeing the prices of their products?
And the prices.
They were also doing real-time performance tests, not just showing numbers and graphs, and totally roasting Intel.
Oh, we're done on the Power Mac G4. And the Pentium's building the floor. All right?
So for me, those were the most exciting, interesting, and unpredictable times where Apple was trying so hard to impress everybody, and nobody knew what they would come up with next. And when technology was moving so fast that this thing, which was touted as a supercomputer, was essentially obsolete and discontinued just a few years later when it was supplanted by the G5 architecture and then later surprisingly by Intel itself. So I got myself a nice example of this later model Power Mac G4 at an auction for around $30. So let us go back to cleaning and exploring this unit and seeing whether or not it works and what can we do with it. Okay, so all in all, this thing doesn't look too dusty. And the first thing you probably notice when you open up this thing is this massive aluminum heatsink. Like that's pretty huge. This is where the G4 processor is. And as you can tell by the sticker, these things get stinking hot. This is just a damp brush and it picks up the dust quite efficiently. Last time I showed myself cleaning a computer using a brush, people were upset that I didn't use a vacuum cleaner. But then when I do use a vacuum cleaner, people complain about creating static. So yeah, this doesn't throw the dust in the air because it's a slightly wet brush and it does a good job of picking up the dust. Even though this thing really isn't as dusty as some of these old computers can be. One more reason I'm not using a vacuum cleaner is sometimes I do these videos in the middle of the night and I live in an apartment building. And no, I cannot take this thing outside to blow off because I live on the 5th floor with no elevator. One thing I am very happy about is that the battery hasn't leaked. This is a 3.6 volt lithium battery, and for sure I'm going to be replacing this one. So upon taking the battery out, I was just curious whether or not it held any charge. So I measured it and I was surprised to see a reading of 3.5 volts, which is almost as good as new. But I still replaced it because I had too many bad experiences with batteries leaking. Now it is possible that this is some sort of a leak-proof battery or something, but these batteries are very cheap, so why risk it? After replacing the battery, there's a little PSU reset switch you apparently have to press. Moving on to this part of the computer, we can see that this thing has 2 optical drive bays, and at the moment only one of them is populated. And we can also see that this thing has 2 hard drives installed. The first one is the Western Digital 80 gig hard drive. I'm not sure about the second one, but we'll check all of that out once we get the machine up and running. I have no idea whether these are functional drives, but we'll see. One nice thing is that these are just ID hard drives, so I have replacements if these one turned out to be defective. This thing is quite neatly laid out. I'm just gently cleaning this thing. And it would be nice to be able to disassemble this thing and to clean it out properly. But one thing that kind of sucks about this case is that many of the parts are riveted. If you can see these guys and also these ones, yeah, those are all rivets. But I'm just gonna clean it the best I can. I think somebody took good care of this computer. It was very clean. Oh, this thing is heavy as heck. Hello. I think we found some old plastic to peel off. Oh god, that's not good. Well, I guess we have to clean that too. It's not too bad. It's just not as satisfying as I thought it would be. See? This thing has my name on it. Ah, heck. This was just a sticker it came with from the auction. Look, this is where the cheese grater came from. So this thing here is a lock, so if you'd like, you could put a padlock through here, and with this thing activated, you can't open the door. That's kind of nice. Power Mac G4, designed by Apple in California and assembled in Ireland. Now I could be wrong, but I know that IBM had factories in Ireland where they made their early computers. And since IBM was the supplier of the PowerPC architecture chips, I guess they assembled the machines in their factories. That's my guess anyway. So this thing has quite a nice set of I/O. It has 4 USB ports. So this must be a third-party USB expansion card because we also have 2 USB ports down here. Also, this graphics card seems to be capable of driving 2 monitors. So yeah, we'll see what kind of a graphics card that is. And we also have FireWire ports. We also have a couple of modem and LAN ports and audio in and out. Awesome. So after cleaning this thing, I wanted to get it all set up on my desk. So I got a 3x4 non-Apple monitor, an Apple keyboard I restored in a previous video. Go watch it. Okay, so it looks like we're ready for the power on test, which is always quite exciting. I have my Apple keyboard here, a random mouse. I didn't plug any speakers in yet because I'm pretty sure that this is an internal speaker. So I'm curious whether or not we're going to get any sound out of that. You ready? This is legitimately the first time I'm turning this computer on. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Oh. Yeah. I didn't plug the power cable in. I think now we're ready for the first power on. Let's go. So it turns out something was wrong with the socket I was plugging this thing in. Okay, I guess this is take 3. This is kind of stressful, but let's see. Okay. Did you hear that? That was the most intimidating bong I've ever heard. Jesus. So the thing is powering on, but... Oh god. Okay, so we have video. That's good. That's good. So it is displaying a question mark, which means that it cannot boot from the hard drive. Okay, so looks like we're gonna have to do some troubleshooting. I'm not sure whether or not the hard drive has died, or perhaps we just need to install an operating system. So I wanted to try booting from the optical drive, but it took me a while to figure out how to get it open. Oh yeah, heck yeah, buddy. So we got the drive tray to come out. Okay, so we're gonna try loading in an OS 9 boot disk, and yeah, we'll see whether or not we can get this thing up and running. I think I do have some original OS 8 and OS 9 boot disks, but I'm gonna have to go look for them, and also I'm not sure whether or not they're compatible with this machine. So we're gonna try booting off of those, and if that doesn't work, we're gonna burn some fresh copies of OS 9 boot disks if the optical drive ends up working. If not, we'll see whether or not we can find a replacement for that. Ugh. Okay, I'm back. That was tough. So I found my stack of old Apple boot disks. So yeah, let's see what we can find here. Oh geez. So we have, this is for a MacBook Pro. This is an OS 10 boot disk. Yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so this is a Mac OS 9 update CD featuring Sherlock 2. So I don't know whether or not we can boot off of this, but I guess we can give it a try. Not sure whether or not this disk is good, but I guess we'll see. Ooh, it's like an engine. So it does not want to boot off of that CD. So now we have a couple of issues. Issue 1, the CD I've used is just not working, or it's not bootable, whatever. Perhaps it's just an update CD. Problem 2, this thing has a screwed up optical drive. One way to resolve that issue would be to burn another known working OS 9 boot disk. I'm gonna go to my modern computer and try working that out. In the meantime, I guess we can try just getting the old CD out. Okay, good. So I'm gonna try finding a working copy of OS 9 boot disk, and I'll be right back. I then proceeded to burn a new copy of OS 9 2.2. And while that was going, I made myself a cup of coffee. Okay, so I'm back with the installation CD. So we're gonna try this again. We're gonna pop the disk in and reboot the computer and see whether or not it boots off of that CD. Something's happening. Okay, we have a nice little Mac icon here. I haven't seen this in ages. Mac OS 9. Ha! I love it. I love the old Finder logo. I like everything about this. This is bringing back so many memories. I had Mac OS 9 on my old Snow G3 iBook back when I was in school. Wait a minute. Is this thing booting into... So if I'm getting this right, this thing is actually booting into the desktop. So perhaps putting the boot CD in kickstarted the hard drive or something, because it says is rebuilding the desktop file. So does that mean that it's gonna boot to the desktop? Because I thought we were gonna have to reformat the thing and then install a fresh operating system, but as far as I can see, this thing is actually booting. I don't know, we'll let it do its thing and then we'll come back to it and see what it did. It's been ages since I've messed around with these old Macintosh operating systems, so I've forgotten that you can just boot into them without installing them first. Okay, so this thing seems to be running macOS 10.2. So I opened up the Apple System Profiler, so I guess we can see what this thing is running. Okay, so you can see that this thing has 4 512 megabyte RAM sticks. It has 1 megabyte of L2 cache. So this is PowerMac 3.6. So it's running dual-core 866 megahertz PowerPC G4 processors. And I can see 3 disk drives mounted. Okay, so what I suspect it's happening here is that this thing has an 80 gig drive, which we saw when we opened the computer up, and yeah, it has 70 gigs available, and then it has another 200 gigabyte hard drive, which is partitioned into 2 separate units, and it's empty. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so after digging around this thing for a little bit, I suspect I understand what's happening now. So by looking at this volume here where the OS is, I suspect that this thing actually had OS 10 installed. I'm not sure which version of OS 10, but why do I think that? Well, because I can see all the standard OS 10 apps, including iChat and iCal, image capture, iTunes, mail, QuickTime. So all of these to me look like OS 10 applications, which is why when I try opening them, it doesn't want to open them up. The thing I'm confused about is why doesn't it want to boot into OS 10 if it has an installation on this volume? I'm not sure. So I guess we're just gonna try rebooting and seeing whether or not it actually boots to OS 10. After rebooting, I wanted to see whether or not I could install OS 9 on the hard drive. So this was a much faster boot. Alright, so let's just go to macOS install. This program cannot run on your computer. Why can't I run this? So this particular version of the PowerMac G4 was introduced around 2003, which means it was very much designed to run OS 10. Now, even though this machine is also capable of installing and running OS 9, these older machines are very particular about the version of the OS you're trying to install. I've tried installing OS 9 using several different disks and methods, and I've also tried a workaround where you copy the systems folder to the hard drive, but even that wouldn't work. System software on the startup disk only functions on the original media, not if copied to another drive. Well, screw you! Why would you do that? And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that OS 9 really isn't the operating system this thing should be running natively, because you can still run OS 9 applications under OS 10, and that in my experience works really good. So I've decided to go ahead and install OS 10 Tiger to this machine. So I made myself an OS 10 Tiger boot disk using my old Mac Pro, and yes, I do still use that machine for all sorts of things. Okay, we have an Apple logo. That's awesome. So since Tiger was released around 2005 and this computer was released on 2003, I really think it's an appropriate operating system for this class of machine, but we'll see. We'll see how it runs. Hey, this is looking much more familiar. So at this point, it was just a matter of waiting through the installation process. So while we're waiting for this thing to install, let me tell you a little story about how I got into these old Macintoshes. In the 90s, my dad worked as a photographer for a publishing house. Now, design and publishing was one of the niche markets for Apple back in the day. So my dad was surrounded by all these old performance and power Macintoshes. So when he got into digital photography, he also naturally wanted to get a Mac. A huge advantage for digital cameras back in the day was, of course, FireWire. Since he was a field photographer, he wanted to get a laptop. I think the first one was a clamshell iBook, and then later he got a Snow iBook G3. And on occasion, I got a chance to play around with them. Two games I specifically remember were on these laptops were a game called Nanosaur and Bugdom. And then later on, as he upgraded the laptops, I got to have his older models. And nowadays, Apple products are ubiquitous and they're almost like a status symbol. But back in the day, I was literally the only one I knew who had a Mac computer at home. People used to ask me like, what the hell is that? And the worst part for me was it was completely incompatible with all the games and softwares my friends were running. So in a way, I kind of hated that thing. But back then you were happy if you had any sort of a computer, much less a freaking laptop. And even though later on we've got some other computers, including some Windows PCs, I think by 2002 we've gotten a generic beige Pentium 3 tower of some sort. The old Macintoshes earned a special place in my heart, so I appreciate every chance I get to play with an old machine like this. Okay, story time is over, the installation is just about finished. And one thing I really appreciate about OS X is the little music that kicks in once the installation is finished. Oh! So after entering all the information and configuring all the settings, we got to the desktop. Woohoo! We got in! Look at this cute desktop. This thing has an airport card. I don't think it's going to connect to any of the modern networks, but I don't really want to get this thing online, so... Okay, so at this point we have a running operating system, and there are certain things I would really like to do on this machine. So we're gonna try testing out a couple of things on this old PowerPC beast, and yeah, we're just gonna have fun. Okay, so I've put some games and software on this USB, and we'll see how well of a job this computer does at running those. So I have two games here. If you remember me talking about the games that I used to play on my dad's old Mac, yeah, these were the ones. So Nanosaur and Bugdom. So we're gonna try running those, but one thing to note is that these are OS 9 applications. And one nice thing about Tiger is that it's the newest operating system capable of running OS 9 applications in classic mode. So we'll see whether or not it's capable of doing that. So we're going to start with Nanosaur. Classic cannot find a Mac OS 9 system folder. So I'm actually going to insert the Mac OS X boot disk again because I think we should have an option to install OS 9 support. So if you want to run classic apps in OS X, you have to have an OS 9 systems folder. And I wasn't able to find that on the OS X installation disk. So I went back to the OS 9 disk and grabbed the systems folder off of that. But when I tried running OS 9 apps, it would just error out. So instead, I tried using another system folder I found online. I have downloaded another system folder from Macintosh repository, and we're gonna try using that one instead the one that came on the disk. So we're just gonna drag this one here, and we're gonna try using this one instead. So I've configured the new system folder and rebooted the machine. Oh yeah, it's loading. It's loading. Come on. It's readjusting the screen. Okay. This copy of Nanosaur is not registered. I think we can do that later. Let's just go to the demo version. Oh my god. Now I haven't seen this run in probably over 20 years. So seeing those flying logos and the menu and hearing the music, I mean, if you're watching this video, you probably know the feeling. I just laid back and enjoyed reliving some of my earliest gaming memories. And even though I had a Nintendo 64 at that time, which had similar 3D platformers, I think this might have been the first time to see that concept on a computer, because the only games I remember seeing in the 90s were 2D DOS games. And these early 3D adventure games really struck a chord with me as a kid back then. So after having an overdose of nostalgia, I decided to move on to another blast from the past. So Bugdom was another Pangeo software my dad had installed on his iBook. It's another 3D adventure game, and I have fond memories of exploring it when I was around 6 years old. It has a few cool mechanics, and it's just so nice and colorful. And I'm really happy to have the machine that does a good job of running both OS X and OS 9 applications. It's been a while since I've last messed around with these old PowerPC Macs. So I was very curious to see how well they would perform doing some other things. So one other thing I remember doing back in the day was running emulators. So I've downloaded some PowerPC emulators, and we're gonna see how well they run on this G4 system. If I remember correctly, as a kid, I actually had a PowerPC NES emulator called iNES. That was actually an OS 9 emulator, which ran fine, but for some reason it didn't have any sound. So instead I've installed RockNES, which is an OS 10 application, and it ran beautifully. So I tried running some of the NES classics like Super Mario Bros. And Castlevania, and they all ran without issues. So I wanted to try emulating some more advanced systems like SNES. So I've installed SNES 9X, which is an emulator I was also familiar with. And the reason I liked having these emulators as a kid is because I had very few PowerPC native games I could run. Remember, where I'm from, Apple computers back then just weren't a thing, and pretty much no retailers had any games or software you could get off the shelf. I mean, there's still no Apple Store here where I live. I mean, there was an online Apple Store, but come on. So these emulators were a great way of having a huge game library. To be honest, I don't even know where they came from or how I got them on my computer, but I do remember my dad taking these computers to an IT guy at his publishing house. If you were around back in the day, you know what I'm talking about. The guy, the man, the legend, the one who had access to the internet. So anyway, after testing a couple of Super Nintendo games, I've also installed a Game Boy emulator, and it ran under OS 9, which is why it probably had some graphical issues. But still, I played a round of Tetris. Fun fact, I'm on the Tetris Game Boy leaderboard at speedrun.com. See if you can find me. After that, I wanted to step it up a notch and see whether or not this thing can run N64 games. Yep. So yeah, this is Mupen64, a classic emulator from back in the day. And as you can see, the performance is quite sucky. So since I actually had a Nintendo 64 back in the day, I didn't really have an emulator. And when I started running N64 emulators, I already had an Intel machine. And yeah, we used to spend hours playing Mario Kart and other games. This is me and my friends goofing around on my old Mac. I guess this was around 2007 or 8. Inglorious 3GP potato quality. So yeah, I don't know why this didn't run any better on this G4 system. Perhaps it's a graphics issue or just an emulator issue, but I decided to move on to actual games. So I was digging around trying to find some retail games that would actually run on this PowerPC machine. And even though I do have quite a few Mac-compatible retail games, they all require an Intel processor. So I've settled on StarCraft, which runs on PowerPC. This is one of my favorite games, so I was very happy to see it run on this system. As a kid, I was always amazed and terrified by the intro FMV.
Are you prepared to go all the way with this, Alexei? Yes, I am prepared to go all the way.
So since I was having fun, I decided to have myself a beer and to play a 8-player free-for-all deathmatch, and it did a great job running this game. But come on, this is a supercomputer, so I really wanted to find a game that would test its abilities a bit better. And it didn't take me long to remember the perfect candidate, because right around the time this thing was introduced, John Carmack started showing up at Macworlds, demoing his new game.
John Carmack from id Software. John is going to give us worldwide first peek at something he's working on, running on Mac OS X and the GeForce 3.
All right, what I've got here is a demonstration of our new in-development gaming engine. And
yeah, back then Doom 3 really did feel like something you had to run on a supercomputer. So I was very curious how this game from the future would run on this higher-end G4 system. And even though my configuration leans towards a higher end, it still has only a 64 megabyte graphics card. So I was surprised how playable this thing was. I mean, sure, this isn't 60 FPS, but would I be amazed to see this performance in 2004? I would play the nuts off of this back in 2004. So I was curious about pushing this thing a bit more. So I found a demo for Call of Duty 2, which is a game from 2005. And the lack of VRAM was definitely showing here. Now, it did meet the official system requirements, but the graphics were all over the place. The colors were all messed up and the frame rate was pretty awful. But I guess the game was barely playable. I mean, I would play this as a kid. I mean, look, this thing runs Duke Nukem 3D, so what more could you ask for? Now, as you know, apart from playing games, one other thing I like testing with my old computers is whether or not I can make some music with them. So I've downloaded a copy of GarageBand 2, which was quite a throwback, and I've used my modern guitar interface, the iRig Pro, to record a little sample song. And again, I don't want to sound like an Apple fanboy, but all of that, just worked. Now, excuse me for talking over this, but my last couple of videos got copyright claims, so I'm doing my best to avoid that. Now, this was a super fun project, and I really liked messing around with this machine. And I was so happy that it was in a perfectly working order. I mean, you never know about these things you get from auctions. So if you ever get a chance to mess around with this class of machines, yeah, I would recommend it. And I also hope you had fun taking a closer look at this thing with me. And if you did, you might want to consider subscribing. I do videos on old retro hardware, old PCs, Macintoshes, game consoles, and more. I do overviews, repairs, restorations, so if you're into those things, yeah, I'd appreciate the support. Also, what were your experiences with old Macs? Share them in the comments, I'd like to hear them. Take care and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for watching.